Imagine it's 1994. You are an air traffic controller stationed somewhere on the African coast, just staring at your radar screen.
Sounds like a high-stress job already.
Right. And you're tracking this Italian passenger plane. It's a completely routine flight, nothing unusual, when suddenly the blip just vanishes.
It's gone from the screen.
Completely gone. There's no distress signal, no change in altitude, no erratic maneuvers at all. The sky is simply empty.
Oh, wow. So you're probably assuming the absolute worst.
Exactly. You spend 20 agonizing minutes assuming a catastrophic crash happened until, literally without warning, the plane just reappears on your screen.
Wait, same altitude and everything.
Yep. It continues on, lands safely. So you rush out to the tarmac to ask the crew what went wrong, fully expecting, a scene of sheer panic.
Right, because they just fell out of the sky for 20 minutes.
But instead, the pilots are confused by your panic. To them, it was a perfectly smooth, uninterrupted flight. But then, all 315 passengers and the entire flight crew look down at their wrists, and they realize that their watches are exactly 20 minutes slow.
That is the exact kind of historical anomaly that just forces us to question the basic rules we think govern the universe.
Right, because what if that 20-minute gap wasn't an instrument glitch, but a literal tear in the fabric of reality?
And that is exactly the premise we're unpacking today.
Yeah, we are doing a deep dive into a highly unorthodox, just mind-bending document. It's titled 36, Mirage, the Emergence of the Elysium World.
It's quite a title.
It really is. And this text argues that mirages, those shimmery illusions you see hovering over a hot highway, or like those ghostly cities that appear over the ocean.
Right, the ones we usually write off as weather tricks.
Exactly. The author claims they are not weather phenomena at all. They're actual physical glitches, like literal brief windows into a 36-dimensional space called the Elysium World.
Now, just as a quick ground rule for today's deep dive, this text freely blends scientific critique with some incredibly deep spiritual and metaphysical claims.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just physics.
It does, and we aren't here to tell anyone to, throw away their physics textbooks or adopt a brand new worldview. We are really just putting on the author's glasses today to see the universe exactly how they see it.
Right, because the underlying logic they use to construct this whole theory is just fascinating to pull apart.
It really is. We're exploring the architecture of a totally different reality.
But to build that new architecture, the author first has to bring a sledgehammer to the old one.
Oh, absolutely. They have to clear the foundation first.
Yeah, they spend a huge amount of time systematically dismantling the standard scientific consensus on optics and mirages.
And they actually employ a bit of strategic humility here, which is interesting. They claim their knowledge of optics is only superficial, so they don't, and I'm quoting here, show off skills in front of an expert.
Right, but that humility is a total Trojan horse.
Exactly, because they immediately launch into this barrage of highly specific, genuinely tricky questions aimed right at the heart of textbook physics.
So let's look at that textbook physics for a second, just to set the stage. We all learned it in middle school. You put a pencil in a glass of water, and the pencil looks broken.
Right, refraction. The classic experiment.
Yeah, the teacher tells you light hits different densities of air or water, and it bends. So the standard explanation for a mirage is that you have hot air over a desert sand dune or cold air over an ocean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And light passes through these atmospheric layers, it bends, and it projects an image of a distant landscape up into the sky. It feels, very tidy.
It's very tidy right up until you start poking holes in the actual mechanics of it, which is exactly what this document does.
Yeah.
The author starts by interrogating the very concept of these distant landscapes. Like, if every scientific explanation says mirages are reflections of scenery from somewhere else on Earth.
What exactly constitutes distant?
Exactly. Are we talking 10 miles?
Yeah.
1,000 miles?
And think about how obsessive people are with geolocation today. Like, if a highly detailed city skyline appeared in the sky over a desert, thousands of people online would theoretically be able to identify the exact buildings and map them to a real city.
Right. You'd have internet sleuths figuring it out in an hour.
But the author points out that these mirage cities, which are often recorded in incredible detail, are never actually matched to a real, verifiable counterpart on Earth.
Never. The math of the reflection just never points back to a physical origin point.
Which is wild.
It is. And the author uses that lack of verifiability to push deeper into the actual optics. They pose a really tough mechanical problem.
Oh, the inverted image thing.
Yeah. If light is refracting and reflecting through the atmosphere to create these images, shouldn't the image always follow a predictable optical rule?
Yeah.
Like, why are some mirages seen in the sky perfectly upright, while others are entirely inverted?
Right, it doesn't make sense if it's a uniform lens. And here's the question that really made me pause. Light from objects on the ground naturally reflects upwards, right?
Right, bouncing off the surface.
So how, mechanically, is that light bouncing off the empty sky and reflecting downwards back into our eyes?
Well, the author acknowledges the scientific answer to this, that light undergoes this sort of n-fold continuous refraction through various atmospheric layers.
But they don't buy it.
Not at all. They argue that if the atmosphere functioned as this perfectly calibrated continuous mirror, we would be seeing mirages every single day over every single city.
But we don't. Mirages are incredibly rare and very localized. Which brings the author to a specific anomaly they use as a case study, the Penglai Peninsula in Shandong.
Yes, the Penglai Peninsula is absolutely critical to their argument.
There is a very famous mirage recorded there on December 16th, 2002. And under the standard model, mirages over the ocean are supposed to happen in the summer.
Right, because you need the air high up to be hot and less dense, and the air right near the cool water to be dense.
Exactly, that temperature gradient is the lens. But December 16th is the dead of winter.
Yeah, the thermodynamics of the standard explanation completely break down in that scenario.
Literally freezing temperatures.
If summer heat dynamics are the required trigger for the optical illusion, the author asks, how did a massive, highly detailed mirage materialize in the freezing cold?
And you know what's crazy? Some experts actually tried to explain away the recent frequency of Penglai mirages by pointing to environmental cleanup efforts.
Oh, I remember reading that part.
Yeah. They argued that because the air quality had vastly improved and the pollution was gone, the air was suddenly clear enough to produce these optical illusions.
And the author is just utterly dismissive of that. They actually call it politicians' language.
Ah, politicians' language.
Yeah, like it's just a convenient excuse rather than a scientific truth.
Because it completely ignores historical precedent. The author points out that before the Industrial Revolution, the air over Penglai was exponentially cleaner than it is even after modern cleanup efforts.
Right, zero industrial pollution.
Yet, historical records show mirages were incredibly rare back then, only appearing like once every few years. If pristine air is the catalyst, the skies over Penglai should have been filled with mirages centuries ago.
Exactly.
Furthermore, look at a place like Hawaii. Hawaii has some of the most pristine, unpolluted ocean air on the planet, but you do not see frequent, massive mirages dominating the Hawaiian skyline.
Right, so the author is systematically isolating the variables here. They're demonstrating that it cannot be purely about heat, and it cannot be purely about air clarity.
And if someone argues that Penglai just has this, static, unique geographical environment that acts as a permanent lens.
The author asks a devastating follow-up. If the lens is permanent and unchanging, why is the picture different every single time a mirage appears?
Good point. Which brings up their final and honestly arguably strongest critique of the refraction theory, the missing moons.
Ah, yes. This is where the physics argument really hits its peak. The author points out that our atmosphere is undeniably built of distinct layers with radically different densities, right? You have the convection layer, the stratosphere, the ionosphere.
And if the scientific consensus is that these layers act as giant, refracting mirrors capable of bouncing images of cities across the globe,
then we have a massive visibility problem when it comes to celestial bodies.
Exactly. When the sun shines or when we have a bright full moon, those atmospheric layers should be catching that light.
We should constantly see dozens of illusory, refracted suns and moons projected all over the sky, overlapping with one another.
Right, just like we see the moon reflected in the ripples of a pond. But the sky is totally empty of those reflections.
Yeah, the author is using this absence of celestial mirages to force a paradigm shift.
By thoroughly dismantling the meteorological explanations, they create this vacuum. The standard models simply cannot account for the inconsistencies.
So if we toss out the idea that the atmosphere is acting like a giant bent mirror, we are left with a massive question.
What is the actual mechanical explanation for a floating city appearing in the sky?
And this is the pivot point of the whole document. The author steps into that vacuum and introduces the core of their worldview.
Which is?
They argue that mirages are not reflections of earthly scenery at all. They are localized distortions of time and space, bleeding over from the Elysium World.
Okay, this is where it gets wild.
It really does. To explain how a 36-dimensional space interacts with our three-dimensional reality, the author categorizes time into two distinct structures, longitudinal time and latitudinal time.
Let's try to visualize this for everyone listening because the geometry of it is a bit mind-bending.
Yeah, an analogy would be great here.
Okay, imagine you're looking at a complex math graph. We humans, our entire material universe, live our lives moving along the x-axis. That is longitudinal time.
Just moving straight ahead.
Exactly. It only moves forward in one single direction from the past to the future. But the author argues there is an intersecting z-axis. That is latitudinal time. It represents the non-material world, the Elysium World.
And the intersection of those two axes is where the physics get truly strange.
How so?
The author suggests that if you could somehow step off the x-axis and onto the z-axis, you aren't just moving to a different place in the universe. You have completely exited our material time.
Okay, a great way to picture this is to think of the x-axis as a train moving forward on a track. And the z-axis is like a helicopter hovering directly above the train.
Oh, I like that.
Right. And the mirage we see in the sky is just the shadow the helicopter is casting onto the train as it passes overhead. It's a brief intersection of two completely different vehicles of reality.
That analogy perfectly captures the author's most staggering claim, really. They state that our entire Earth, our solar system, the entire Milky Way, already exists inside this 26-dimensional Elysium world.
We are this train moving through it.
Exactly. And that completely flips the premise of what we consider to be real.
Because we operate under the assumption that the things we can touch and measure are the baseline reality, right?
Right. But the author insists that the physical world, the mountains, the oceans, our biological life cycles, all of that is the actual illusion.
Wow.
The text uses this really profound phrase, emptiness is not empty, form is not real.
Form is not real. It's a complete inversion of material physics.
It is. The author explains this through the lens of energy concentration. When energy is small and limited, it takes a physical shape. It becomes a rock, a tree, a human body.
But when energy is massive, like beyond our comprehension, it becomes formless.
Yes. The text says great form has no contour. The Elysium world is composed of this massive, formless energy, making it the only true, enduring reality.
So the physical matter we interact with on the x-axis is just a temporary, localized projection of smaller energy.
Exactly.
But I mean, that immediately raises a massive biological question.
Which is-
If this brilliant 36-dimensional utopia is literally overlapping with my living room right now, why am I only seeing my couch and my television? Why is humanity completely blind to the z-axis?
Well, the author's answer is surprisingly grounded in evolutionary biology. We simply lack the hardware.
The hardware.
Yeah, the biological structure of the human eye was not designed to perceive latitudinal time.
Okay, so we're looking at the universe through a pinhole.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The author reminds us that human eyes currently perceive less than 3% of the known electromagnetic spectrum.
Less than 3%.
Yeah, we cannot see ultraviolet light, we can't see infrared rays, gamma rays, or beta rays.
And those waves are physically present in the room with us, passing right through our bodies, bouncing off the walls. But to our biological hardware, they are entirely invisible.
Right. So the author is essentially arguing that the Elysium world operates on a frequency that falls into that 97% blind spot.
Ah, I see.
So a mirage isn't an optical illusion. It is a fleeting, localized glitch where a tiny fragment of that invisible z-axis suddenly downshifts into a frequency that our x-axis eyes can temporarily perceive.
That is fascinating. But I mean, theoretical geometry and invisible axes only go so far. A theory this massive requires actual evidence of interaction.
Right. If these two axes are constantly overlapping, somebody must have stumbled between them at some point.
Exactly. And the author provides 3 distinct historical case studies of people allegedly slipping off the x-axis and falling directly into the z-axis.
The first incident takes us to January 28, 1915, during the Gallipoli campaign in World War I.
Okay.
A Turkish army regiment was advancing toward a strategic position on a hill. And according to the historical account the author cites, the weather suddenly behaved in a way that just defies meteorology.
What happened?
Clouds descended entirely vertically, dropping straight down like a curtain and completely enveloped the hill.
Wait, the mechanics of that alone are bizarre. Clouds don't drop like elevator cars.
No, they don't. And the sensory details get even stranger. As the fog settled, metallic beams of light began emitting from within the cloud bank.
Metallic?
Yeah. And a Turkish straggler named Likad was watching this unfold from a distance. He reported seeing his comrades, still marching in formation, step directly into the glowing fog.
Oh, wow.
Lacad shouted for them to stop, sensing something was really wrong, but they seemed completely deaf to him. They just marched mindlessly into the light.
And then what?
A moment later, the clouds slowly lifted straight back up into the sky and just floated away. The hill was entirely empty.
No way.
The entire regiment had vanished without a single trace, weapon, or footprint left behind.
And the author's argument isn't that they were captured or killed, right? It's that the vertical cloud bank was a mirage, a physical manifestation of the Z-axis touching the battlefield.
Exactly. The soldiers simply marched off the X-axis of time.
That is chilling. But, I mean, if you think a World War I battlefield is too chaotic to be reliable evidence, the author jumps forward to modern aviation.
Right, which brings us back to the Italian passenger plane in 1994 that we talked about at the very beginning.
The radar disappearance.
Exactly. The plane vanishes from the African coast radar for 20 minutes, then reappears and lands.
But the key to this story is the subjective experience of time. The duty officer is panicking, expecting a catastrophe. But the pilots and the 315 passengers are utterly calm. To their perception, they hadn't disappeared at all.
The flight was completely normal to them.
Right. Until they checked their watches. Every single timepiece on that aircraft was exactly 20 minutes slow.
And this is where the author's theory of latitudinal time perfectly aligns with the anecdote. For the plane, which had slipped into the Z-axis, perhaps only a microsecond of actual time passed.
Right. Their biology and their watches didn't even register a blink.
But back on the X-axis, in our longitudinal reality, the train kept moving forward. 20 solid minutes ticked by in the control tower.
It is a massive example of time dilation, which actually leads right into the third example.
The woodcutter story.
Yeah, this one is pulled from the author's own family folklore told by their grandmother, and it really digs into the existential terror of interacting with the Z-axis.
It's quite a story.
So the woodcutter is working on a mountain. He's navigated his entire life. He knows every single trail. But he takes a wrong turn and suddenly finds himself in this beautiful, unfamiliar hillside where two old men are sitting and playing chess.
Right, and he doesn't want to interrupt, so he squats down nearby just to watch the game.
But as he sits there, he notices the environment around him is behaving erratically.
Specifically the trees.
Yeah, the leaves on the tree next to the chessboard are cycling through the seasons at a super rapid pace. They turn yellow, drop, bud green, turn yellow again. The physical environment is basically fast-forwarding around him.
He gets distracted by the leaves, looks away for a second, and when he looks back, the old men are gone.
The mirage has essentially switched off.
Right. So he suddenly recognizes the familiar mountain path and hurries back down to his village. But when he arrives, the architecture is different. The people walking the streets are total strangers.
Oh, man.
He starts frantically asking about his friends and family. The villagers look at him in confusion and say they're talking about people who died decades ago.
That is terrifying.
It gets worse. When he finally asks about his own name, a villager says, "Oh, that was my great-grandfather. He went up the mountain to chop wood when he was a young man and was never seen again."
Wow. So the woodcutter spent what felt like a single afternoon watching a chess game on the Z-axis, while entire centuries passed on the X-axis.
It perfectly illustrates the terrifying disconnect between the two streams of time.
But, you know, the woodcutter story introduces a massive, glaring contradiction in the author's own logic.
Which is?
If the woodcutter successfully stumbled into the Elysium World, this 36-dimensional realm of higher energy, why was he kicked out?
Oh.
Like, why didn't he just stay in the Z-axis? Instead, he is violently expelled back onto the X-axis, only to discover everyone he ever loved has been dead for centuries.
That is a great question. And it's where the physics of the author's theory merge completely with their spiritual philosophy.
Okay, how does that work?
The transition between the material world and the Elysium world is not purely random. It is governed by a physical law that the author calls merits and virtues.
So virtue isn't just like a moral gold star on your permanent record. In this framework, it's a literal physical frequency.
That is the absolute perfect way to understand it. You cannot permanently occupy the Elysium world simply by accident. Your internal spiritual quality has to vibrate at a specific frequency to remain there.
Okay.
According to the author, the two old men playing chess were actually the woodcutter's relatives from a past life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they orchestrated the mirage to give him a brief glimpse behind the curtain to prove the Elysium world was real in order to lay the foundation for his future spiritual growth.
But he was physically expelled back to the mountain path because his accumulated merit simply hadn't reached the required frequency to survive in that dimension.
Exactly.
The author actually uses a fantastic analogy to explain this mechanism of clearance. They ask, why can't an ordinary citizen just walk through the front doors and go live in the White House or the Kremlin or Zhongnanhai?
Because the system actively repels you. You don't have the security clearance.
Right, the Secret Service physically removes you from the premises.
Exactly.
So in the author's universe, merits and virtues are the ultimate cosmic security clearance.
If your moral frequency doesn't match the massive energy of the Elysium world, you are violently repelled, the same way a magnet pushes away the wrong pole. The universe's design basically ejects you back to the x-axis.
And this concept of cosmic clearance leads the author to a defense of the great spiritual prophets throughout history, doesn't it?
It does. They specifically address figures like Jesus and Buddha Shakyamuni. If the Elysium world is real, and it requires this intense moral frequency to access, the author asks us to critically examine the motives of the people who first told humanity about it.
The logic here is incredibly pragmatic. The author asks, why would these historical figures lie about a higher multidimensional realm?
Right. If it is all a giant scam, what is the motive?
Swindlers lie to extract something of value. They deceive wealthy people to steal money, or they deceive politicians to gain influence.
But the historical record shows that figures like Jesus and Buddha actively gave up all worldly possessions. They walked away from political power and wealth.
Right?
And more importantly, from the perspective of the z-axis, we, humanity, have absolutely nothing of value to offer them.
Because we are stuck on the train, we only have x-axis currency, which is completely meaningless in a 36-dimensional space.
Exactly. So the author concludes that because these prophets had nothing material to gain, their message cannot be a swindle.
It has to be real.
In this framework, yes. Their teachings about abandoning worldly attachments to seek a higher, quiet, brilliant path must be an authentic revelation from the Elysium world. They were providing a roadmap to achieve the necessary frequency for those whose spiritual awakening allows them to hear it.
Wow. Let's just take a breath and look at the massive architecture this author just built.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. I mean, we started by breaking down the thermodynamic failures of light refraction over the Penglai Peninsula. We threw out the middle school textbook and graphed time itself onto intersecting x and z axes, redefining our entire physical universe as a localized illusion.
Yep.
And finally, we explored World War I vanishings and time-dilated woodcutters as evidence of a 36-dimensional reality that operates like an exclusive club, where your entry ticket is literally the physical frequency of your morality.
The author has constructed an entirely self-contained, internally consistent alternative framework for how reality operates.
And just as a reminder to you listening, our goal today was simply to map out that framework. We are extracting the core arguments of this incredibly unique text to show you how the author pieces their universe together without taking any stance on its scientific validity or its religious claims.
But stepping into their worldview does leave us with a lingering, scientifically accurate concept that is very hard to shake.
Oh, the spectrum thing.
Yeah, the author is entirely correct when they point out that human eyes are only equipped to perceive a microscopic fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum.
We are essentially a biological radio permanently stuck on one single station, entirely deaf to the thousands of other broadcasts filling the room right now.
We are completely blind to 97% of our own reality.
Which is just nuts to think about.
So, if we accept that we cannot see the vast majority of the physical universe interacting around us every single second, it begs a fascinating question.
What's that?
What other entirely natural, everyday phenomena might we be wildly misinterpreting, simply because we don't have the biological hardware to see the whole picture?
Wow. That is a thought that will definitely stick with you the next time you look up at a strange cloud formation. And suddenly that middle school science experiment with the pencil and the glass of water doesn't feel quite as absolute as it used to.
Not at all.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you and keep your curiosity alive.